I grew up in hell. They called it love. I wore clothes my sister threw away, ate leftovers, and was told I should be grateful. Now I have my own house by the sea. And my mom said, "It's perfect for your sister's family." I just smiled and made one phone call. I wake up to the sound of the waves. It never becomes a background. Every morning it wakes me up, reminding me that I'm home. Not in the house I grew up in, but in the present. The house by the sea that Grandpa Hank called the last refuge of a free man. The house is quiet, too quiet. It's been a month since the funeral, but I still listen out of habit, expecting to hear Grandpa's shuffling footsteps down the hall, the clinking of his favorite ceramic mug, or the soft mumbling as he talked to himself, working on his notes. Cup of steaming coffee in hand, I step out onto the terrace. The wooden decking is damp from the morning dew. My right foot drags a little, and I lean on the terrace railing. From here, I have a view of Sandpoint Bay, the small coastal town that became my refuge 7 years ago. The morning sun colors the water golden, and I watch the slow, inexorable movement of the sea toward the shore. I take a sip of coffee and open my laptop. My paper for a scientific journal on a rare species of mollusk that lives only in our bay is almost finished. All that's left is to polish the conclusion and add a few references. Grandpa would be proud of me, a marine biologist, a researcher, a man who found his calling. Who would have thought that a lame girl who was laughed at by her classmates would be able to stand for hours in tide pools, studying the life of their inhabitants? My fingers glide across the keyboard. The words come easily. It feels good to immerse myself in my work, to not think about loss, the empty house, the uncertain future. I describe the adaptive survival mechanisms of mollusks in the harsh conditions of the intertidal zone, how they withstand the onslaught of waves, the heat of the sun, how they know how to hibernate, conserving energy until the water returns. Just like you, Grandpa would say. He always found parallels between my life and the sea creatures we studied together. The phone rings, snapping me out of my work trance. It's the number for Mulligan and Associates law offices, the local firm that handled Grandpa's cases. My heart clenches. I'm still not ready for this kind of call. "Good morning, Miss Ellington." Frank Mulligan's voice sounds uncertain. "I hope I'm not too early?" "No, not at all, Mr. Mulligan. I've been up a long time." "Carla, he stammered, uncharacteristically for a man renowned for his courtroom eloquence. "I'm afraid I don't have good news. We've finalized your grandfather's paperwork and—" He didn't have time to make a will. The world around me stops. The surf, the seagulls, it's all muffled, like I'm covered in water. What does that mean? My voice sounds weird, like it's not mine. Technically, in the absence of a will, the estate goes to the next of kin. In your grandfather's case, that would be his daughter, your mother. Frank pauses. But there are nuances. You lived with him for the last few years, cared for him. That could make a difference. He wanted to leave the house to me, I say, feeling my throat catch. He always talked about it. I know, Carla, and we can prove it. But without a will, the process will be more complicated. I wanted to warn you, in case your mother contacted you about it. After the call, I sit still, staring at the water. The waves roll in, relentless and indifferent to human problems. For the first time in a long time, I feel a panic attack coming on, that familiar tightness in my chest from my teenage years, the labored breathing, the cold sweat on my palms. I close my eyes and try to breathe the way my therapist taught me. Slow inhale through my nose, hold, long exhale through my mouth. 5, 7, 8, over and over. A memory arises before my eyes, clear as a photograph. The night of my graduation, 7 years ago. I'm standing outside the school gates, clutching a bag with a change of shoes to my chest. My dress, the only new dress I bought with the money I saved from lunch, is torn and stained with punch. Tears stream down my face, smearing the cheap mascara I applied so diligently in front of the mirror in the school bathroom. Charity, my older sister, the homecoming queen, stands surrounded by her friends. Her resounding laughter echoes across the schoolyard. "Geez, Carla, did you seriously think that ragbag and lame gait would make you invisible? Limp-legged girl decided to play Cinderella," Laughter. So much laughter all around. And then a call to my grandfather, the one person who never looked at me with pity or disgust. His gruff voice in the phone receiver, "Wait there, I'll come get you." And he did. In his old truck, traveling 4 hours from Sandpoint to Spokane. Picked me up, broken and humiliated, from a place that had never been my home. Mom didn't even try to hold me back. "Since you've made up your mind, Carla, you can have your stuff. Just don't say later that we kicked you out." I remember sitting in my grandfather's car as he silently loaded my meager belongings, clothes, books, a collection of seashells. I remember him looking at the house where he spent his youth, where he raised the daughter who had become such a stranger. There was no anger in his eyes, only deep weariness and determination. "Let's go home, mermaid," he said, using a childhood nickname he'd coined when I was 5 and could sit on the shore for hours, gazing at the tide pools. The vibration of my phone jerks me out of my memories. A message. From my mom. "Charity and I are coming over tomorrow. We need to discuss the house. Perfect place for your sister's family." Bitterness rises to my throat. Of course, they already know. They must have contacted the same lawyer I did, not even a month since the funeral, and they're already planning how to dispose of the house. The house where I found peace, where I learned to accept myself, where I first felt I had a right to my place in the world. My sister, her husband, their children in my grandfather's house. My house. A house that became not just a roof over my head, but a symbol of freedom. Instead of creaking floorboards, along which I learned to walk silently so as not to annoy my stepfather. Instead of a cramped room where I was only allowed to go to sleep. Instead of the table in the kitchen, where I was assigned the farthest corner. I get up and go to my grandfather's study. Everything here has been left untouched since his death. Books on marine biology, a collection of unusual shells, old maps of the coast with his notes. Above the desk is a picture of us, me, Grandpa, and our neighbor Jared against the lighthouse. We're smiling, the sun beating down on the lens, creating a glowing halo around our figures. It was the day I received my first professional recognition, a publication in a local science journal. I take the photograph in my hands, running my fingers over my grandfather's face. His eyes, faded with age, but still beaming with warmth. The wrinkles around his eyes are a testament to a life lived with a smile no matter what. I won't give them the only thing you've given me. My voice is quiet but firm. A home and freedom. The morning came too quickly. I woke up before dawn, with a heavy feeling in my chest that haunted me all night. They're coming today, mother and sister, the family I ran away from 7 years ago. Checking the time on my phone 6 a.m., I decided there was no point in trying to sleep again. After a quick shower and a coffee, I started pointlessly rearranging things in the house, wiped the dust off my grandfather's pictures, checked to make sure there were enough fresh towels in the guest bathroom, cooked dinner, a seafood casserole based on Grandpa's recipe. It was as if she was trying to create the illusion of normalcy in a situation that was anything but normal. By noon, the house was shining clean, and I was exhausted. Sitting on the terrace with a cup of tea, I looked out at the calm sea and tried to prepare myself mentally. What will I say to them? How would I behave? Would I be able to maintain my dignity when my usual self-defense mechanisms began to fail? The sound of a car pulling up made me flinch. A black SUV with tinted windows. It had to be Charity's car. She'd always gravitated towards showing off her status. Taking a deep breath, I slowly made my way toward the front door. My right foot was a little out of step, as it always does when I'm nervous. A slight nudge, noticeable only if you knew what to pay attention to. When I opened the door, I saw them, frozen by the car, looking around the house and lot as if appraising the merchandise. Marilyn, my mother, looked much the same as the day I left, except with a new haircut and more jewelry. Her face, always carefully made up, retained the same expression of restrained dissatisfaction with a world that didn't appreciate her enough. Charity, on the other hand, had changed more. The last time I'd seen her, she'd been a 22-year-old newlywed with ambition and a husband from a good family. Now there stood before me a confident woman in an expensive suit, with professional makeup and a cold, assessing gaze. "Carla, dear," my mother exclaimed when she saw me. Her voice sounded falsely cheerful. How you have grown up. She came over and hugged me quickly, barely touching me, the way one hugs distant acquaintances at social gatherings. She smelled of expensive perfume, too heavy for a coastal town. Hi, Mom. I forced myself to smile. I'm glad you made it safely. Charity came up for a hug too, one that was just as superficial and insincere. Poor Carla, she sighed, looking me over. It must be so hard for you, losing your grandfather. You were so close. There was a hint in her tone, as if the closeness between me and my grandfather was something wrong, almost suspicious. I ignored it, gesturing for them to come inside. Come on in, and I'll show you to your rooms. Dinner will be ready by 6. Oh, you even made dinner. Marilyn looked around the living room, barely concealing her curiosity. How nice. I hope you didn't have to work too hard with your condition. I gritted my teeth. It's been 7 years, and they still see me as an invalid, unable to live independently. I'm coping, I replied briefly. The second bedroom is upstairs, overlooking the ocean. The bathroom is en suite. Marilyn, meanwhile, had already turned her attention to the interior. She ran her finger along the wood paneling, still intact from the 70s, and wrinkled her nose. Hank hadn't changed the furnishings at all, had he? It's all so outdated. She pulled a small notebook out of her bag. She'd have to write down what needed updating. These panels definitely need to come off. They make the house look dark. And this furniture, too bulky for this space. I watched in silence as my mother walked around the living room, taking notes as if she was already the lady of the house. Charity joined her, professionally assessing the space. There's great potential here, she said, looking out the window at the ocean. With a view like this and the right remodeling, the price could skyrocket to double. The coast is hot right now, especially authentic homes like this. You sound like a realtor, I said, feeling anger rising inside. Charity smiled her rehearsed smile. I am a realtor, Carla. One of the best in Spokane. Last year, I sold $12 million worth of real estate. She pulled a business card out of her jacket pocket and held it out to me as if I were a potential client. If you decide to sell, I can help you maximize the proceeds. I don't plan to sell the house, I said quietly but firmly. Marilyn and Charity exchanged glances that I remembered well from my childhood. The looks that said, Poor Carla, she doesn't understand reality. Of course, dear, now is not the time to talk about such things, Mother said softly. We're still grieving for Hank. Will you show us the rest of the house? The next hour turned into a torturous tour, with Mother and sister evaluating every inch of the house as if it were an auction. Marilyn continued to make notes on necessary changes, while Charity talked about market value, investment potential, and the demand for waterfront real estate. When we reached her grandfather's office, Marilyn stopped in front of bookshelves filled with specialized literature on marine biology, law, and local history. So many old books, she sighed. I'll have to sort through them all. Maybe the local library could donate them. My heart sank. These books were a treasure trove of knowledge, many with my grandfather's notes in the margins, his thoughts and observations. I used them in my work almost daily. Those books are staying here, I said, with a pressure that surprised even myself. Marilyn raised her eyebrows, but remained silent. When we returned to the living room, I felt I needed a break from their presence. I'll go check on dinner, I said. Make yourself comfortable. In the kitchen, closing the door behind me, I inhaled deeply, trying to calm myself. Their arrival stirred memories I'd long tried to bury. I was 9 when my father left the family. A year later, my mom married Warren Hedge, a successful insurance agent with his own house in suburban Spokane. With him, affluence came into our lives in ways it hadn't before: new furniture, regular dinners at restaurants, brand-name clothes for Charity. But not for me. I remember standing in Charity's room as she went through her closet before the school year started. A pile of clothes on the bed, t-shirts, jeans, dresses, many still with tags. You can have it all, she said casually, pointing to a stack of clothes in the corner. It doesn't fit me anymore, or I'm tired of it. I remember the humiliation of trying it on. Everything was too big. Some of the shirts were up to my knees. But my mom just shrugged. Roll up the sleeves when you're older, and it will fit. Charity is so kind to share with you. That night, there was lasagna for dinner, Warren's favorite dish. I was late to the table because I'd been working on my homework for a long time. By the time I got there, everyone was finishing. You're digging again, Mom said grudgingly. Sit down if you want to eat, but we're not going to wait for you to finish. We have a show to put on. I silently sat down in my seat at the far corner of the table. Charity was already clearing her plate, leaving half of it untouched. I'm full, she said, noticing my gaze. You can finish it if you want. I wanted to say no. I wanted to say I didn't want her leftovers. But I was hungry, and a new batch would mean cooking it myself, and Mom wouldn't be happy with the mess in the kitchen. So I silently took her plate and began eating while the family moved into the living room. The sounds of the television came from the kitchen, Charity's laughter at the jokes on the show, Warren's approving comments. Charity got an invitation to the math Olympiad, I heard my mother's voice. Her teacher says she might win a prize. That's my girl, Warren said proudly. She'll go far. No one mentioned that I'd gotten a perfect score on my literature essay, and the teacher had read it out in front of the class as an example. I told them at dinner, but no one reacted. Everyone was busy discussing Charity's new dress for the school dance. The sound of the door opening brought me back to the present. Charity peeked into the kitchen. We're going to take a walk to the beach, she announced. I want to take some pictures for Instagram. Dinner's at 6, right? I nodded, feeling oddly relieved to be alone for a while. When they left, I went to the window and watched them walk down the path to the beach. Two slender figures, so alien against the backdrop of my house, my beach, my life. By 6 o'clock, the casserole was ready, the table was set, and I was mentally prepared for the inevitable conversation about home. Marilyn and Charity returned from their walk lively, as if being by the ocean had energized them. At dinner, the conversation began with the usual topics: the drive from Spokane, the weather, local attractions. I answered politely but briefly, feeling the tension building by the minute. Finally, as we moved on to dessert, the apple pie I'd baked that morning, Marilyn set aside her fork and looked at me with an expression that was apparently meant to portray maternal concern. Carla, dear, we need to discuss the house situation, she began. I spoke to a lawyer. As Hank's next of kin, I have a legal right to the house. I clutched my napkin under the table, but kept my expression neutral. I'm aware of the legal side of things, I replied calmly. Mr. Mulligan informed me yesterday. It's good that you understand the situation, Marilyn nodded. Look, Charity and I talked it over, and we've decided that we're not going to rush into a sale. You can stay here temporarily until we find you something more suitable. Suitable? I raised an eyebrow. Well, dear, this house is too big for one person, especially with your limitations. The stairs, tending the garden, it all takes effort. She paused. Besides, we're thinking of Charity's future. My sister stepped forward, her eyes alight with enthusiasm. Carla, you have no idea how perfect this house is for us. Bradley can work remotely. The kids love the beach. She gazed dreamily out the window at the ocean. They'll just love the view. And for you, we'll find a cozy apartment in town, closer to amenities, maybe even with a social worker nearby. I almost choked on my tea. A social worker? They still thought I was helpless, even though I'd lived on my own for 7 years, had a degree and a job. I have a job here, I said. I research local marine life, writing for scientific journals. Oh, that's such a nice hobby. Marilyn smiled indulgently. But darling, you have to be practical. This house is a valuable asset. If we sell it or rent it out, you'll get your share. It'll give you a comfortable life. I looked at them both, my mother and sister, so sure of their right to control my life. They hadn't changed. The same Marilyn and Charity, to whom I had always been a burden, an inconvenient reminder of the imperfections of their perfect world. I'll think about your offer, I said, knowing they would take that as agreement. Charity brightened. That's great. I've already made a list of the interior changes we need to make. We could start renovations as early as next month. The rest of the dinner was spent in Charity's monologue about the plans for updating the house. Marilyn chimed in with suggestions. I remained silent, mechanically finishing my pie and feeling my resolve growing inside. No, I will not give them the house. I won't let them decide for me again. I will not go back to being the poor relative who is favored out of pity. When dinner was over, Marilyn announced that she and Charity were going back to the hotel. They had reservations at the Seaside, Sandpoint's only decent hotel. "We'll be back tomorrow," she said, kissing me on the cheek goodbye. "We'll discuss the details of the move." I stood at the door, waving at them until their car was around the corner. Then I went back into the house, cleared the table, and sat in my grandfather's chair in his study. I knew I had to act fast. Picking up my cell phone, I found a number I hadn't dialed in a while. Evan Prescott, my college classmate, was now a practicing attorney specializing in family law. We kept in touch through social media, and I knew he had opened a practice in a neighboring town. The phone rang 3 times before he answered. Evan? It's Carla Ellington. I'm sorry to call you so late, but I need your professional help. It's about my grandfather's estate. The Tides Cafe is right on the waterfront, with panoramic windows overlooking the ocean. I chose a table in the corner that overlooked the lighthouse, an old but still active symbol of Sandpoint. My grandfather loved this place. "This place has the best coffee and the best view," he'd say, as he ordered his invariable Americano and apple pie. I tapped my fingers nervously on the table, glancing at the clock. Evan had promised to be here by 10, and now it was 5-0. After calling yesterday, he'd agreed to meet right away when he heard the worry in my voice. "I'll be in Sandpoint tomorrow on client business. Let's meet and discuss your situation," he said. The door of the cafe opened, and Evan walked in, tall, in a strict suit, carrying a leather briefcase. He'd changed since we'd been in school together, serious, confident. But his smile was the same, open and friendly. "Carla," he waved at me and walked quickly to the table. "I'm sorry if I kept you waiting." "You're right on time," I smiled, shaking his outstretched hand. Evan ordered coffee, and we exchanged a few sentences about life, work, and mutual acquaintances. But I sensed he was waiting for me to get to the point I'd called him for. "My grandfather died a month ago," I began, looking down at my cup. "He didn't have time to make a will." Evan nodded. "I'm sorry for your loss. Hank was an amazing man." "You knew him?" I was surprised. We'd crossed paths a couple times at work. He was known in legal circles as a man of principle. Evan took a sip of coffee. "So what about the house? I take it that's the main issue?" I nodded and talked about my mother and sister's visit, about their plans for the house, about how they'd already begun to dispose of it as if it were already theirs. "Grandfather always said the house would be mine," I finished. "But without a will?" Evan listened attentively, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. "It's a complicated situation, but it's not hopeless," he said when I finished. "According to the law, in the absence of a will, the property does go to the next of kin. In this case, your mother as the daughter of the deceased. But there are a few aspects that may play in your favor." He began to explain the legal technicalities. My grandfather's verbal promise to leave the house to me, my status as guardian during the last years of his life, my permanent residence in the house, and my contribution to its upkeep. "In addition," Evan continued, "it's important to establish whether the house was Hank's personal property or perhaps part of some kind of trust or other legal construct. Your grandfather was a lawyer. He could have envisioned such a situation." "I couldn't find any documentation of that," I sighed. "But there are so many papers in his office. Maybe I should look more closely." "You definitely should," Evan nodded. "Another strategy is to negotiate a compromise with your mother. For example, you stay in the house, and in return, you give up other potential inheritance assets. Is there anything else of value besides the house?" I shook my head. Grandfather lived modestly. The house was the main thing. He had a small bank account, but I don't even know how much money is in there. Evan tapped his pen on his notebook thoughtfully. "In that case, we need to gather as much evidence as we can that Hank wanted to leave the house to you. Witness statements, letters, notes." As he spoke, a man entered the cafeteria. Tall, with reddish hair and a neat beard, his face looked familiar. He was standing at the counter ordering coffee when he suddenly turned in our direction, and I recognized him. Riley Morrison, Charity's ex-husband. As if in slow motion, my mind flashed back to the day I'd first seen him 7 years ago. I was 17 and just getting used to living with a limp after a car accident. Riley seemed to me then the kindest of all the men my sister had brought into the house. He was the only one who actually talked to me instead of just nodding politely, trying to move away as quickly as possible. I remember accidentally overhearing Charity talking to her friends that night. I was looking for a quiet place to get away from the noise of the party and wandered into an empty room at the end of the hallway. There were voices coming from the adjoining bathroom, Charity and her two friends. "He's so simple," my sister said. "Honestly, sometimes I don't know what to talk to him about. All his stories about school, about his students. As if I'm interested." "So why are you with him?" asked the mocking voice of one of my friends. "Temporary," Charity replied lightly. "Riley's a good guy, stable, reliable. Plus, his dad's on the board of directors of 3 companies. Connections, you know. It's like a stepping stone to a better party. In a couple years, when my career's on the upswing, I can think about someone more relevant." I remember freezing, shocked by my sister's cynicism. A week later, at a family dinner, I saw the way Riley looked at Charity with adoration, as if she were the center of the universe. It was odd that it was now that memory surfaced. Maybe because it was followed by another, more painful, prom night. I'd been preparing for this day for a long time, saving money from my part-time job at the school library to buy a dress. Not secondhand, not Charity's rags. My own dress. Simple, blue, with silver trim. I even had my roommate do my hair and makeup. The prom was held in the school gymnasium, decorated to look like a starry sky. Charity, already married to Riley, was invited as an honorary alumna and former prom queen. She stood surrounded by her old friends, radiant and flawless, wearing a red dress with an open back. I kept to the side, enjoying the music and watching the dancers. When Jason Miller, the quiet boy from photography class, came up and asked me to dance, I said yes, even though I was worried about my limp. We twirled to a slow tune, and for a moment I felt normal. Just a girl at prom dancing with a cute guy. And then I heard Charity's loud voice. "Look, the limp girl is playing Cinderella." The music continued to play, but it was like it stopped for me. People around me turned around, and someone giggled. "That dress?" Charity continued, raising her voice even higher, as if she wanted everyone to hear. "God, Carla, did you really think that rag would make you invisible? It just emphasizes your, peculiarity." Jason tried to pull me away, but I froze in place, paralyzed. Charity came closer, followed by a group of her friends. "You know," she said, leaning toward me with fake concern in her voice, "you should have consulted me before you bought it. I could have helped you choose something more appropriate for your situation." In that moment, I saw Charity for the first time for what she was, cruel, petty, enjoying other people's misery. I ran out of the gym, tears streaming down my face, smearing my mascara. In the schoolyard, I pulled out my phone and called the one person who never made me feel inferior, Grandpa Hank. "Hey, Carla Ellington?" Riley's voice brought me back to the present. He was standing at our table with a cup of coffee in his hand, looking at me with surprise and slight uncertainty. "Riley," I nodded, trying to hide my confusion. "It's been a long time." 7 years to be exact, he smiled. "That time at graduation." Understanding flashed in his eyes. He remembered. "This is Evan," I introduced him. "My friend and lawyer. Evan, this is Riley Morrison, my sister's ex-boyfriend." They shook hands, and Riley asked after a moment's hesitation, "Do you mind if I join you?" "If I'm not in the way, of course." I glanced over at Evan, who nodded faintly. "Sure, have a seat," I said, pointing to a vacant chair. Riley sat down, sipped his coffee, and looked at me with genuine interest. "How are you? I heard about your grandfather. I'm sorry." "Thanks," I nodded. "How are you? What are you doing in Sandpoint? As I recall, you and Charity lived in Spokane." A shadow ran across his face. "I moved here about a year ago. I teach history at the local high school." "Oh, I didn't know what to say." "I'm sorry about that." Riley shrugged. "You shouldn't be. It was for the best." He was quiet for a moment. "So what brought you to Sandpoint? Last I heard, you were in college in Seattle." I lived here with my grandfather for the last 7 years, I answered. After college, I came back and work as a marine biologist. I do research, write for scientific journals. Impressive. There was something in his smile that made me feel warm. Respect, sincere admiration. Evan coughed tactfully. Carla, we should continue discussing your case. Riley stood up immediately. Of course, I didn't mean to interrupt. It was nice to see you, Carla. Wait, I held his sleeve. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe intuition. Or desperation. It's about my grandfather's house. My mother and Charity arrived yesterday. They want to take it for themselves. The expression on Riley's face changed. Is Charity here? In Sandpoint? I nodded. She and her mom are staying at the seaside. Grandpa didn't have time to draw up a will, and now they think the house should go to them. Charity was already planning a move here with her family. Riley slowly sat back down, his face becoming serious. What are you going to do? Trying to find legal ways to keep the house. I nodded at Evan. My grandfather always said he was going to leave it to me, but without a will. Riley stared at me for a few seconds, as if making a decision. Then he leaned closer. Look, Carla, I might be able to help. There's something you need to know about Charity and your mother. Information that could, affect the outcome of this case. Evan and I looked at each other. What kind of information? Evan asked cautiously. Riley shook his head. Not here. I need to check some paperwork, make sure everything is as I remember it. He pulled out his cell phone. Give me your number. I'll get back to you as soon as I'm sure. I dictated the number, feeling a strange mixture of hope and anxiety. Why do you want to help me? I asked bluntly. Riley smiled sadly. Let's just say I have my own beef with your sister, and I know Charity well enough to know that if she wants your house, she'll stop at nothing. He finished his coffee and stood up. I'll call you. After Riley left, Evan and I discussed possible strategies for a while. He promised to look at the deeds to the house to see if there were any clues to his grandfather's legal history. Still, Carla, he said as we said goodbye, the best thing to do would be to find documentation of your grandfather's intentions. A letter, a record, witnesses, something concrete. I promised to look, and we agreed to call back in a couple days. On the way home, I thought about my meeting with Riley. What did he mean? What information could he possibly know about Charity and Mom? And why had he decided to help me? It's strange how our fates are intertwined. Riley is the man my sister used as a stepping stone to a better party. Now he's here in my town and may hold the key to solving my problem. As I pulled up to the house, I noticed my mother's car in the driveway. They were back earlier than promised. A vague unease prickled me. Opening the door, I froze on the threshold. The living room was transformed. My grandfather's old sofa had been pushed against the wall. The rocking chair was gone, replaced by a modern, high-backed armchair I'd never seen before. The bookshelves were partially emptied, many books stacked in cardboard boxes against the wall. Mom, I called out, feeling a wave of anger rising inside. Marilyn came out of the kitchen with a cup of tea in her hands. Oh, Carla, you're back! We thought we'd clean the place up a bit. Honestly, your grandfather lived like a museum. All those old things. Where's Grandpa's rocking chair? I asked, trying to stay calm. That old junk? She waved her hand. Charity and I took it to the garage. It took up so much space and squeaked terribly. We got this new chair from a store in town. It fits in beautifully, doesn't it? I stared at her in silence, not trusting myself to open my mouth. The fear of being crushed again, humiliated, rendered invisible in my own home, held me back. And the books? I finally squeezed out. Oh, those dusty volumes. Marilyn wrinkled her nose. To be honest, half of them are covered in mold. It's bad for your lungs. We picked out the ones that were in decent condition. The rest? She nodded at the boxes. Charity's taking them to a recycling center. Or a charity store if they're willing to take them. Charity came out of the hallway with a bunch of old photo albums. Oh, Carla! You're just in time. I found these old albums in the closet. We can look through them together and decide which pictures are worth keeping and which ones are... She didn't finish when she saw the look on my face. Is something wrong? I stared at the upside-down living room and felt a wave of rage rising inside me. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was pure, concentrated rage, the kind I'd spent years learning to contain and hide deep inside. But now it was bursting out, flooding all over me. "What are you doing?" My voice was quiet, but I could hear the metal in it. "Who gave you the right to touch my grandfather's things?" Marilyn set the cup down on the table, a new table that hadn't been here before, and looked at me with an expression I remembered from my childhood. A mixture of annoyance and condescension, as if I were an unintelligent child who didn't understand simple things. "Carla, don't be dramatic. We're just cleaning up. This house—" She put her hand around the space. "It just screams neglect. Your grandfather was a wonderful man, but let's face it, he didn't care for order." "It's not neglect," I hissed. "It's his house, his things, his life, which you are now methodically destroying." Charity rolled her eyes, just like when she was a kid and thought I was unbearably boring. "Jesus, Carla, nobody's destroying anything. We're making the house livable. Honestly, how do you even live here? These old armchairs, dusty books, pictures of people no one remembers." I took a step forward, feeling my hands shaking. "Put your things back where they belong, now." Marilyn and Charity exchanged glances, the same exchange that always preceded their rallying against me. "Carla," my mother began in that peculiar tone of voice she reserved for situations where she wanted to feign infinite patience. "I understand you're upset about your grandfather's death, but you have to face the truth. This house is mine now. Legally, I have every right to own it and everything in it. My grandfather wanted me to keep the house. But he didn't make a will, did he?" Marilyn shrugged with fake regret. "So his wishes, whatever they were, are null and void." Charity came over and put her hand on my shoulder. I could barely keep from throwing her off. "Look, it's not like we're kicking you out on the street. You can live here until we find you something suitable, or even stay when Bradley and the kids and I move out. It'll be fun, just like the good old days." The good old days. Those words made me sick. The good old days when I was invisible in my own home, when my every accomplishment was ignored and my failure was flaunted, when I wore Charity's rags and ate for everyone. "You can't just come and take everything," I said, trying to sound confident. "I lived here with my grandfather for 7 years, took care of him when he was sick, maintained the house. This is my home as much as his." Marilyn pressed her lips together. "After all we've done for you," she began, and I realized what was about to begin. The old song I'd heard 1,000 times. "We raised you, we fed you, we clothed you. Your medicine, your doctors, do you know how much it cost? And college? Who paid for your education until you ran away? Warren and me. And that's how you repaid us, by running off to your grandfather before you even graduated. You were always ungrateful, Carla." "I graduated," I said quietly. "With honors. I got a degree in marine biology. You just weren't interested." "And who paid for it?" Marilyn parried. "Hank? On his modest pension? Don't be ridiculous." "Scholarship," I replied. "And part-time jobs. I earned my own money for my education." Charity snorted. "Of course you did. Who would hire you with your peculiarity?" She gave me an expressive look at my right foot. "Let's be honest, Carla. You parasitized your grandfather. He was too kind to say no to you. And now you're clinging to his house because you know you could never afford anything like this on your own." Her words hit me like a slap. Parasitized. The same accusation I'd heard all my life from my stepfather. She has to earn her keep. As if my existence was a burden I was obligated to make up for. The memory came suddenly, vivid and painful. I'm 12. I'm standing at the kitchen sink, washing a mountain of dishes after Sunday dinner. My right hand, not yet fully recovered from the accident, holds the sponge awkwardly. My fingers are numb from the cold water, but I keep rubbing the plates, afraid I won't make it before the movie the family is about to watch. Charity's laughter comes from the living room. Marilyn's comments about how talented her oldest daughter is. Warren turns on the TV. The movie's splash screen plays. "Carla, are you coming soon?" shouts her mother irritably. "Don't stall." "I'm almost done," I answer, hurriedly rinsing the last of the plates. Warren appears in the kitchen doorway. Tall, always neatly dressed, with cold eyes that never warmed when he looked at me. "You're poking around again," he says, glancing at his watch. "The movie has already started." "Sorry," I mumble, dropping my fork in the sink. My hand is shaking with fatigue. Warren looks at me with that expression I hated so much, a mixture of annoyance and cold calculation. "You know, Carla," he says quietly, so the living room can't hear, "you should be thankful you have a roof over your head and food to eat. A lot of kids in your situation end up in institutions, or on the streets." I remain silent, lowering my eyes. "Think of it as your contribution to the family," he continues. "You have to earn your keep. That's fair, isn't it?" There's an explosion of laughter in the living room as Charity tells me something funny. Warren gives me one last look and returns to his family, leaving me alone in the kitchen with wet hands and a lump in my throat. "Carla, are you listening to me?" Marilyn's voice brought me back to the present. I blinked, focusing my eyes on my mother. She was looking at me with annoyance. "I'm saying we're not the enemy here. We're your family. We've always wanted the best for you." She sighed with a look of martyrdom. "We held you out of pity when many people in our shoes would have sent a child with these problems to an institution. We did everything we could to make you feel normal." "Normal?" I grinned bitterly. "You made me feel inferior every single day, a failure, a burden." "There you go, dramatizing again." Charity sighed. "No one thought you were defective. We were just being realistic about your abilities, and we still are. Do you really think you can keep this house, pay taxes, make repairs, on your biology salary?" I straightened up, looking my sister straight in the eye. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm thinking. And what's more, that's what I've been doing for the last 3 years while Grandpa was sick, paying the bills, hiring workers to fix the roof, painting the terrace. This house, my house, I've kept by myself. Now, I'm going to have to ask you to get out of here." Marilyn and Charity froze, shocked by my sudden firmness. "You can't kick us out," my mother finally said. Legally, I interrupted. "The house still belongs to my grandfather's heirs, who have yet to be determined. Until then, I have as much right to be here as you do. But unlike you, I live here permanently. So now I'm asking you to leave my house. We can continue this conversation tomorrow, when I am ready to discuss the future of the house constructively." Charity opened her mouth to object, but Marilyn stopped her with a gesture. "All right," she said, gathering her bag. "We'll leave. But this conversation isn't over, Carla, and I hope you'll be more reasonable tomorrow." They left, leaving behind an upside-down living room and a feeling of devastation. I stood in the middle of the room, shaking with adrenaline and anger, unable to believe I'd found the courage to stand up to them. 7 years ago, I'd just run away. Today was the first time I fought back against them. Slowly, I began to put things back where they belonged. The rocking chair they took to the garage was too heavy for me, but I was able to put most of the books back on the shelves, arrange the pictures, and put the new table in the closet. The job took almost an hour, and all the while a storm of emotions raged inside me. When I finally finished, I felt like I needed a hiding place, a place where I could gather my thoughts. Instinctively, I headed for my grandfather's study. It was his holy of holies, the room that Marilyn and Charity had thankfully not yet had time to clean up. Grandpa Hank's study was a small room in the back of the house, with windows overlooking the ocean. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with legal tomes, local history books, and marine biology albums. An old desk where Grandpa had worked all his life. A map of the coast on the wall, with notes made by his hand. I sank into his chair, feeling devastated and scared. What if Marilyn is right? What if legally there's nothing I can do? Would I really have to lose the one place where I felt at home? I opened the top drawer of my desk, hoping to find some paperwork, something that might help me in this situation. Inside were pens, paper clips, old business cards, the usual junk that accumulates in desk drawers. Nothing useful. I closed the drawer and leaned back in my chair, feeling despair come in waves. At that moment, I noticed a strange thing. The bottom drawer of the desk didn't pull out all the way. I remembered my grandfather grumbling about it sometimes, saying, "The damn drawer is sticking again." But now, looking at it more closely, I noticed that the drawer was shorter than it should have been, given the depth of the desk. Intrigued, I knelt down and peered under the desk. Something was definitely wrong with the design. I pulled the drawer out fully and examined the back of it. It looked perfectly normal, but something told me there was a mystery here. Grandpa loved puzzles. He often said, "The most important things should not be kept under lock and key, but where no one would guess to look." I tapped on the back of the drawer. The sound was muffled, not what it should be from a thin wood panel. Looking carefully around the edges, I noticed an almost invisible gap. It wasn't the back wall of the drawer. It was a false panel. With a beating heart, I gently pried it open with my fingernails. The panel slid open, revealing a small secret compartment behind it. Inside was a folder, an old map folded several times, and a small key. I pulled the folder out first. Inside were documents, not the usual legal papers, but something more specific. I started reading and felt goosebumps run down my spine. They were documents about the status of the land on which the house stood. According to them, it was part of a special ecological zone, declared a protected area because of a rare species of clam that lived only in this bay. Mollusks that my grandfather and I had studied together and about which I had written my thesis. The date on the documents was stamped 3 years ago, when my grandfather already knew about his illness. His signature was next to the signatures of the representatives of the Environmental Committee and the local administration. I unfolded the map. It was an old map of the coast, but with modern markings. Grandfather had marked the boundaries of the ecological zone, which included our site and the adjacent shoreline. Along the boundary were penciled notes in his handwriting. Reserve boundaries: Middleus californianus var. Henkensis habitat, no commercial development. I couldn't believe my eyes. Grandpa didn't just love to talk about local nature, he actively protected it. And in the process, he seemed to be protecting our house from the possibility of being sold or rebuilt too. At that moment, my phone vibrated. A message from Riley. "Found what I was looking for. Meet me at the lighthouse tomorrow at 10 in the morning. This will change everything." I reread the message a few times, then looked at the papers in my hands again. Did Riley really know the status of the land too? Or did he have some other information? One thing I knew for sure was that Grandpa Hank wouldn't be Hank if he hadn't left me a clue, a path to salvation. He always said that the sea teaches us the most important lesson, to adapt and survive even in the harshest conditions. Like those clams we studied, tiny creatures that know how to cling to the rocks even in the worst storm. The Sandpoint Lighthouse towered over the rocky headland like the last guardian of the coast. White with a red stripe, it had stood there for over 100 years, guiding ships through dangerous reefs. I arrived early, walking nervously along the parapet, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. In my hand, I held a folder with the documents I'd found in my grandfather's stash. I heard footsteps behind me and turned around. Riley was walking down the rocky path, holding the leather folder. "Hey," he said, coming closer. "You're early." "I couldn't stay home," I admitted. "Too many thoughts." We stood side by side, looking out at the restless sea. I showed him the documents I'd found, explained the status of the reserve, which my grandfather had secretly formalized 3 years ago. "It makes sense," Riley nodded, looking at the papers. "And it complements what I found." He opened his folder and pulled out a few documents. "Do you know why Charity and I broke up?" he asked suddenly. I shook my head. The topic never came up in our rare conversations. I discovered that she was using my connections on the school board to get information on families who were planning to sell real estate. His voice sounded bitter. She was especially interested in the elderly, families in difficult situations, those who could easily be persuaded to sell a house below market value. I listened, feeling the anger building up inside. It was so like Charity to use every opportunity for her own gain. When I started asking questions, she denied it at first. Then she explained that it was just business. But I sensed there was something else behind it. Riley showed me the documents. I started digging, and I found this. The documents were printouts of Charity's email correspondence with a Mr. Zhang, a representative of a foreign investment company. The emails openly discussed a scheme to acquire coastal real estate through frontmen for commercial development. The problem is that much of Sandpoint's coastline is protected by local natural area protection laws, Riley explained. It's illegal to build commercial properties closer than 500 feet from the shoreline. But if they buy up existing private homes and lots and then go through the city council to change the status of the area, they can build anything they want here, I finished. Hotels, restaurants, private piers. Exactly. Charity's been working for this company for 4 years. She finds the right properties, arranges the purchase, and your mother helps with the paperwork through her connections in city government. I felt a chill run down my spine. Wait, does my mother know about this? Riley nodded. She's been on the case for at least 2 years. I found references to her in correspondence. Her name is listed as local counselor. I closed my eyes, trying to comprehend the information. My own mother and sister were involved in a scheme that could destroy the unique nature of the coast. For money, for status. And my home, I began. Your house is a key part of their plan, Riley confirmed. It's in the perfect location, right in the center of the bay, overlooking the lighthouse. The perfect spot for a future hotel or luxury apartment complex. I looked at the documents in my hands and in Riley's hands. 2 pieces of the same puzzle. Grandpa had unknowingly built a defense against Charity and Marilyn's plans by registering our lot as an ecological preserve. I need to call Evan, I said, pulling out my phone, and contact the environmental committee. The next few hours passed in feverish activity. Riley and I met with Evan in his office, where we went over the paperwork together. Evan was impressed with his grandfather's foresight. Hank was smarter than most people thought, he said, looking over the papers. Registering a private ecological reserve is a brilliant move. It's practically unassailable in court, especially since he actually discovered a rare species of clam. We discovered, I corrected. My grandfather and I found this colony together when I first moved in with him. I'd started getting interested in marine biology then, and he'd encouraged my research. Evan nodded. That's even better. Your participation in the discovery strengthens your claim to continue your research. He dialed a number on his cell phone. Let's contact the environmental committee right now. A conversation with the chair of the local environmental committee, Amanda Holt, exceeded my expectations. Not only did she confirm the status of the preserve, but she delivered news that made me cry. Your grandfather applied for a research grant for you a month before he died, she said. A grant to study this unique ecosystem. The committee approved it 2 weeks ago. We tried to contact you, but apparently the letter is still in transit. I couldn't believe it. My grandfather didn't just protect the house. He secured my future, the opportunity to continue the work that had become my life's work. I understand your family is disputing the ownership of the house? Amanda asked. Yes, my mother and sister, I confirmed. In that case, you should know that the status of the reserve is not so much tied to the owner as to the area and the researcher who discovered the rare species. That would be you, Miss Ellington. Even if your mother owns the house, she can't change the status of the reserve without your consent. It was a victory. Small, but significant. Now, even if I lost the fight for the house, I could protect the cove from development. When we got back to the house, Marilyn and Charity were waiting. But they weren't alone. With them was a middle-aged Asian man in an expensive suit, the same Mr. Zhang from the correspondence, as Riley had whispered to me. The real buyer, not a front man as originally planned. Carla, darling, Marilyn stepped up to meet us. We were just talking about the future of the house. Mr. Zhang is interested in buying it. He's offering a very generous price. I noticed Charity tense up when she saw Riley. Her eyes narrowed, and her face contorted for a moment with a grimace of unconcealed hatred. What is he doing here? She hissed. Riley's my friend, I replied calmly. So is Evan. They're helping me deal with the situation around the house. Mr. Zhang looked impatient. Miss Ellington, I've heard of the beauty of this place, but I can see that the house needs some modernization. My offer is very favorable to your family. I sat in my grandfather's chair, feeling strangely calm. The storm inside me had subsided, replaced by determination. Mr. Zhang, I'm afraid this house is not for sale, I said firmly. Moreover, this piece of land has the status of a private ecological reserve and cannot be used for commercial development. The silence that followed my words was deafening. Mr. Zhang slowly turned to Charity, his face darkening. What is the meaning of this? he asked coldly. You didn't mention any reserve. Charity looked confused. There must be some mistake, she muttered. The site is clean. I checked the paperwork. Apparently not all of them. I placed a folder of documents from my grandfather's stash on the table. These papers confirm the status of a private ecological reserve, registered 3 years ago. This area is home to a rare species of mollusk found and described by me and my grandfather. Mr. Zhang grabbed the documents, quickly looking through them. His face grew increasingly grim. This changes everything, he said finally. This status renders the plot useless to our plans. Marilyn jumped up like a stunned woman. There must be some mistake. Hank hadn't said anything about the preserve. He couldn't have done this without consulting me, his daughter. He could and did, Evan replied calmly. As the owner of the property, he had every right to use it as he saw fit. And the discovery of a rare species of mollusk gave him legal grounds to register a sanctuary. Charity was furious. You did this, she pointed at Riley. You were specifically looking for a way to get back at me. Riley shook his head. I didn't know about the reserve until today, but I did know about your plans to develop the coast. He laid his folder on the table. And about your illegal schemes with foreign investors. Mr. Zhang glanced at the new documents and stood up abruptly. I see there are issues here that your family needs to deal with internally, he said coldly. Miss Hedge, we will discuss our cooperation later. He turned to me. Miss Ellington, please accept my apologies for the intrusion. After he left, a veritable storm erupted. Marilyn lashed out at Charity, accusing her of incompetence. Charity yelled that she knew nothing about the preserve. They argued as if oblivious to my presence until I interrupted them. Enough, I said firmly. Your plans won't work. The house remains a sanctuary, and I have a grant to continue the research I started with my grandfather. Charity turned sharply toward me, her eyes narrowing. You can't prove that Grandpa wanted to leave the house to you, she hissed. Legally, it still belongs to the heirs, which is Mom. Yes, we can't build a hotel here, but you won't be living here either. Actually, Evan interjected, the reserve status is tied to the researcher who discovered the rare species. You mean Carla? Even if your mother became the owner, she couldn't evict Carla or interfere with her research without risking criminal prosecution. Marilyn looked like she'd been punched. Hank had it all figured out, she whispered. He was always a sly fox. Charity didn't give up. Okay, we can't evict you, but we can make your life here unbearable. She turned to Riley. And as for you and your accusations, they're just the words of an ex-husband with a grudge against his ex-wife. Who's going to believe you? The editor of the Sandpoint Chronicle, Riley replied calmly. Jack Manson, an old friend of mine. He'd already gotten copies of all the documents with the condition that he published them if anything happened to Carla or she lost the house. It was a bluff. Riley hadn't handed over any documents to anyone yet, but Charity and Marilyn didn't know that. I saw them look at each other, assessing the risks. What do you want? Marilyn finally asked. Money? A share of the sale of the other lots? I shook my head, feeling strangely calm. All I want is for you to leave me and this house alone. Forever. Charity snorted. And in exchange, you'll keep quiet about our business dealings? Yes, I nodded. I'll keep the documents as insurance. If you break the agreement, they'll be made public. Marilyn and Charity looked at each other again, silently weighing their options. Finally, Marilyn nodded. Good. We'll sign a quitclaim deed to the house in your favor. But be warned, Carla, there is no more room in our family for you. This is the final breakup. I expected those words to hurt. But instead, I felt only relief. You know, I said, looking at them both, I've thought for years that there was something wrong with me. That I didn't deserve love. You called it caring when you made me wear Charity's rags and finish your meals. But I realize now that you were always the problem, and I will no longer let you decide what I am worth or deserve. Marilyn turned pale. For a moment, her mask of cold calculation slipped away, revealing something akin to pain. I've always loved you in my own way, she said quietly. I looked at her without anger, without resentment, just understanding. Maybe, but love shouldn't hurt. Goodbye. They left an hour later, after Evan had prepared all the necessary paperwork. Marilyn signed a waiver of inheritance in my favor. Charity signed a non-disclosure agreement for illegal transactions on the condition that all claims to the house were terminated. I stood on the beach, watching their car drive off down the road, taking the last shards of my past away. The sea was calm, the tide was beginning to ebb. The water was slowly receding, exposing wet sand and rocks covered in algae and shells. Riley walked over and stood next to me. We were silent for a moment, watching the sunset, which colored the sky and water in shades of gold and purple. "You know," he said at last, "sometimes the tide washes away everything, leaving only what is truly valuable." I smiled, feeling warm inside. And sometimes you have to weather the storm to see a clear shore.
Любі глядачі, дякую вам за перегляд, ставте лайки та підписуйтесь на канал. Також напишіть в коментарях, чи погоджуєтесь ви з Дженніфер, чи вона мала розказати все матері, чи ні, чи мала все розказати своєму коханцю щодо свого чоловіка, чи ні. І також прокоментуйте, чи вам сподобалось це відео.